What is up, guys? Skyler here. We're doing World War II Part 2 by Oversimplified. You guys reached the 150 goal, so we're going to do it. Leave a comment down below what Oversimplified video you guys want me to do next, and let's jump into it. Finish off World War. The first one was amazing.
So what else is happening? Well, when I said Britain was all alone, that wasn't entirely true. Many Commonwealth nations and other allied colonies had joined the war in Britain's support. They would play a key role throughout the war, particularly in the African and Italian campaigns. On the Axis side, Germany, Italy, and Japan signed the defensive tripartite pact, bringing their military alliance even closer together.
Their little faces.
Soviet Union's war against Finland should have been an easy victory, but it became a humiliating struggle, and their military ineptitude was put on.
Yeah, and the crazy, the Finns fought very, very well. Very well. It was very surprising for the Russians. Sadly, the Finns just couldn't hold on forever. Russia was still a big power, and then sued for peace. So sadly, they lost a little bit of their land, but they held on. Russia didn't fully take them over. They did pretty well.
This war against Finland should have been an easy victory, but it became a humiliating struggle, and their military ineptitude was put on full display. In the end, they did force the Finns to sue for peace. Then, they continued their honorable campaign of pushing around much smaller countries by annexing the Baltic states and part of northern Romania.
And that's the thing, though. Russia, besides Germany, Russia, Italy, and Japan really went for smaller, focus on most smaller areas. Russia did help with Poland, and Japan did go for China and Korea, but really China was under its own revolution at the time, its own civil war per se, and Poland was a front on two different wars, a two-front war, so they were struggling too. So really, for the most part, besides Germany, Hitler was everyone else was going for smaller targets.
France's colonies in equatorial Africa were like, heck no, we aren't going to join the Germans, and they all pledged their allegiance to free France, except for Gabon, which had to be taken by military force. The Allies also tried to capture the strategic port of Dakar, but that ended in failure. Mussolini had seen Hitler's successes, and he thought now it was Italy's time to shine, so he tried to take British Somaliland, and that went pretty well. Then he tried to take Egypt, and that went less well. Then he tried to take Greece, and that went really bad.
Yeah.
Churchill began referring to Italy as Europe's soft underbelly.
Yeah, the thing is, Italy, Italy hasn't really seen too much. A lot of his European offensives were with Germany, so you didn't really get to see it. Italy had a little bit powerful, a pretty solid navy and a pretty solid Air Force, so they were just trying to overrun, like we saw before, Ethiopia and these African colonies, places that weren't developed, so really couldn't compete. They weren't as matched equally when it came to Germany's, what commanders and things like that. They just weren't, and Hitler was actually a pretty good tactician. Bit him in the ass, or he bit his own ass later on when he started getting more weary and his health and insanity just dwindled. But he was doing pretty solid, and Italy didn't have it.
He began favoring a military campaign from the south and started sending British troops to Greece. All of this had Hitler pretty concerned, and he moved to protect his southern flank. He had been getting friendly with Hungary and twisted their arm into signing the Tripartite Pact and joining the Axis powers. Romania was also eager to join for protection against the Soviet Union. The Tripartite Pact was designed to prevent any other countries from deciding to join the Allies.
And yeah, that's the thing. These people, they didn't really want to sign right here for the most part. A lot of these people really got in because they didn't want to be invaded by Russia. But you had to pick between a battle of two evils, in their opinion, and it's rather a lot of Hitler kind of got them to sign, or he invaded them. There was only two options really.
Protection against the Soviet Union. The Tripartite Pact was designed to prevent any other countries from deciding to join the Allies, specifically Britain's old ally, the pesky United States of America. When war first broke out, American public opinion was strongly against joining in. In 1940, there was an election. The Republican candidate said, "I will not send any young Americans to die in Europe," and sitting President Franklin D. Roosevelt said, "I will also not send any young Americans to die in Europe. Unless I have to, then I might." And Roosevelt won. Churchill asked him to join the war, but Roosevelt said, "No can do, Winston, but you know what? Here, have some weapons. America began supplying the Allies with food
and that's the thing, FDR really wanted to help, but his arms were tied. The American people saw the devastation that came because of World War I and how torn up Germany was, or torn up all of Europe was, and saw, the financial burden it all took on. America at the time was lucky. They came out pretty unscathed because, the war wasn't on their soil, and they joined the war late. And so they didn't really have too much damages. But the thing is, you got to keep in mind that we're coming out of the Great Depression. I say we're because I'm American. I'm in the United States. America's just coming out of its depression. So it's available, but it doesn't want to fight if it doesn't have to. But it's getting to the point, all the success that they're having, Germany, Russia, Japan, it's looking more and more like, we need to do something. Things are getting a little bit out of hand.
And munitions. But there was one problem. German U-boats were sinking thousands of Allied supply ships in the Atlantic, including...
And also they had mines, not only U-boats, but you see those big circle mines with spikes sticking at them. They were just throwing those in the ocean, and it was getting to the point where you didn't run into them and blow up. They had proximity. The mines were getting that advanced where if a boat just drove near a mine, it'd explode. Luckily, we figured out how to avoid that with I think it was like putting... the mines detected like some sort of metal if the metal frequency got too high, but I think they put tin or something on the boats to avoid that. And then we also developed sonar and radar and better radar, so that way we can see the U-boats and submarines.
American ones. If the Germans could sever Britain's supply line, the UK would starve. Throughout the war, the Allies had to come up with better technology to fight the U-boats. Improved radar, aircraft with longer range, better weaponry and convoy tactics. At one point, a man even called a meeting and said, "Pykrete. You take some wood, you take some ice, you put them together, you get pykrete." And then he pulled out a gun and shot some wood and it shattered. And then he shot some pykrete and the bullet ricocheted off it and hit someone else in the conference room.
I didn't know about this.
Then they tried to make a pykrete aircraft carrier, but that idea was scrapped because that's a really dumb idea.
It's
in
dumb
the
as
end,
fuck.
Alan Turing and his team of codebreakers cracked Germany's Enigma code, and the U-boats gradually became less and less of a threat. Back in Africa, Britain decided to push Italy out of Egypt. Hey, that was pretty easy, so they kept going. Hitler realized he was going to have to finally step in and do something. He went to Bulgaria and Yugoslavia and said, "Hey, I'm going to move troops through you to get to Greece, so either join us or, be invaded." Bulgaria opted to join them. Yugoslavia opted to be invaded. Then Greece finally fell to the joint German
and that's the thing. Slavia, you see they turned blue. They did get help, but it was just too late. Like it's kind of unfortunate how this unfolded.
To be invaded. Then Greece finally fell to the joint German-Italian invasion. The British had moved troops from North Africa to fight in Greece, which helped Rommel and his tank divisions push the British back to Egypt, and they could have kept going, but a small, mostly Australian force held out under siege for 8 months into Brooke, denying the Germans a strategic port city and disrupting their supply line. Despite having some success in the Middle East, the British didn't seem like any real threat for now. Hey, Soviet Union, look out! With 3 million troops, Hitler launched the largest ground invasion in history, and Stalin was far from ready. Both Churchill and Roosevelt had warned him of an impending attack, but he dug his head...
And yeah, like he's saying, he dug his head in the sand. It was all a matter of time. Like, Stalin and Hitler had kind of the same ideology when it came to dictatorship, but different ways completely, and they butted heads all the time. Like, they both were dictators or fascist leaders. But their ideologies were completely different. And they butted heads a lot. It was only a matter of time. And, Stalin didn't care. He saw, all the success he was gaining through, these colonies and things like that, or invading these other people. So he just went along with it. Big mistake, big mistake. And the thing is, invading Russia is hard as fuck. Like, when he did it, invading Russia was the turning point, because what happens with invading Russia, it takes so fucking long. Russia's so big, and Russia has the most natural defense known to man, the cold, and it freezes, and it happens multiple times within wars when people try to invade Russia. They freeze the hell up.
Cap. With 3 million troops, Hitler launched the largest ground invasion in history,
It was
and
deadly,
Stalin was
too.
far from ready. Both Churchill and Roosevelt had warned him of an impending attack, but he dug his head in the sand and the Soviets didn't stand a chance. Germany made staggering progress, with huge encircling movements capturing mind-boggling numbers of Russian troops. 250,000 at Bialystok, Minsk,
and they were just killing them
at Smolensk.
The bad thing is these people disliked each other so much. Same thing with Hitler was doing to the Germany was doing to the United States. They're captured, but what, like, a lot of these very ruthless leaders and commanders within the army and generals, what they would do when they capture, because, you know, when you capture someone, you gotta disarm them, tie them up, bring them with you. What they do because it'd slow them down is just straight up execute them. So it was very deadly and very dangerous. You know, you'd rather execute it or put in the camps. And a lot of times you with those camps, you were killed too. So it's catastrophic losses. And these capture points are dangerous amounts. These are ridiculous amount of people.
Germany made staggering progress, with huge encircling movements capturing mind-boggling numbers of Russian troops. 250,000 at Bialystok, Minsk, 300,000 at Smolensk, nearly 700,000 at Kiev, and again at Vyazma and Bryansk. Leningrad was put under a siege that would last an insufferable 4 years. The invasion of Russia had been Hitler's main ideological goal from the beginning, and his hatred for the ethnic peoples there was now unleashed in all its fury. The Eastern Front of the Second World War was brutal for all that endured it. The Germans were now inside of Moscow, and that's it. It's all over. But then it happened. It got cold. Stupid cold. Hitler had hoped the Soviets would give up before winter, but they kept fighting.
Happens.
His commanders came to him and said, "Can we please dig in for the winter and wait until spring?" "No, keep going." "But oil is literally freezing inside our vehicles." "That's fine, keep going." "We're having to leave the corpses of our frozen horses by the side of the road so we can still find our way in the snowdrift." "Perfectly normal, keep going." Hitler hadn't given his millions of men winter clothing and supplies because he thought he really should have won by now. Then, Stalin called in troops from the Siberian front, specially trained to fight.
These guys were nuts. I like their PPSHs too. Like, you see them in all white. You know, they were practically invisible within the snow. Like, you were getting shot from nowhere, and it was so snowy and so bright that, you know, usually you see the flash of guns. You could even see flashes. And this is before suppressors and things like that were real big. So they were practically invisible walking around, and it made a huge difference. These people were trained to fight in this weather, while the Germans weren't at all. And like you said, the Germans were equipped, but, you know, when you want people to go as fast as possible, they're not super equipped because blitzkrieg. It was all about blitzkrieg. It was more about speed than power. Luckily, Germany had a ton of forces, like the biggest ground invasion, 3 million people, a ton of tanks, and very, very, very powerful with the Luftwaffe. Like, they had insane air support. But the thing is, most of the troops weren't there for a long siege. That wasn't the goal. So they weren't ready for how long this would actually take.
Trained to fight in the extreme cold, and the Germans were no match. They were now being pushed back. They had no choice but to dig in and wait for winter to end. Germany's victories were staggering, and Japan was eager not to miss the victory bus. Their war in China had come to a standstill, but they wanted to keep expanding their sphere of influence and getting those sweet, sweet raw materials. They began making plans to expand southward, but there was a problem. Southeast Asia was heavily colonized by America and...
Yeah, and the thing is, at the time, this is why the attack of Pearl Harbor happened. They really wanted here. This is pretty big, and right here, and right here. But the thing is, Japan's Navy was no match for the United States and Britain's. Luckily, Britain had such a big ordeal at the time dealing with Germany. Germany was constantly bombing them because all Europe has practically fallen at this time, so they're getting bombed. So they really couldn't do a whole lot when it came to Japan. United States at the time was trying to avoid conflicts and stay neutral, and that's when Pearl Harbor happened. And the thing about Pearl Harbor is it was a surprise attack. Japan didn't declare war and then attack, which is usually what you did. You declared war and you went to battle. They didn't do that at all. They literally just straight up attacked, and it was more of assassination on the Pearl Harbor ships. But the thing about the Pearl Harbor ships was they only attacked the boats. They didn't attack anything around it, none of the docking bays, none of the oil, nothing, not even the repair places. So what happened was we just got the ships back running. they completely failed on that front. It was a monetary a momentarily pause. It wasn't very long. So that's really what happened here. And luckily, we're right at Australia, and Australia helped out a lot here. And that's where island hopping comes too, because you can see Australia is right here. So they don't want to. If they lose too much of this land, they're right at the motherland.
Great Britain. It was also full of ocean. Ocean meant naval combat, and there was no way the Japanese Navy could stand up to the US and the UK.
Not at all.
So they thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could destroy their navies before we begin our conquest? And so it was. On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese launched a surprise air raid on the US Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor and inflicted a huge amount of damage. They also attacked British colonies in Southeast Asia. Roosevelt had no choice but to declare war on Japan, and so did Churchill. Hitler then declared war on America, even though he totally didn't have to. The attack on Pearl Harbor seemed like a big Japanese victory, but they didn't attack any of the naval repair yards, fuel storage tanks, or the submarine base, meaning the Pacific Fleet would be up and running again pretty soon. In the meantime, though, the Japanese were able to begin their conquest. They took Guam, the Gilbert Islands, Wake Island, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. They forced Thailand to join them so they could march their troops through to Malaya. They swept through Singapore, North Borneo, the East Indies, New Guinea, the Solomons, and they were now threatening northern Australia and the borders of India. Japan's victory had been as staggering as the Germans,
and the thing is, as well as a lot of these islands and things like that, we were holding all these colonies were holding their territories, but most of their strongest defenses was pushed in other ways. We weren't expecting Japan to invade these islands because Japan realistically had no chance. It took Germany taking all the heat practically to get this to allow this to happen. And Japan was very smart to do this. And the thing is, these people what Japan got to fight, these were ruthless fighters. The Japanese warriors were ridiculously ruthless. They believed, dying for the emperor who they believed God was, the divine right, was worthy enough to die for. And that's why kamikaze becomes a thing. And you may think in today's standards, I don't know how Japan's culture is now, but if you're like American or something like that, we're not educated to believe that. We're educated to believe, our president is someone we vote in, and we control our government. Japan is the complete opposite at the time, and they're still in the divine right era. They have a president, but they still believe in the divine right. And even kids, they're learning that in school to protect their emperor at all costs. They're arming kids, especially when it gets closer and closer to Japan. They start arming more and more kids, and everyone's trained to be fighting. Women, men, and children. And what's worse of all is these islands they take over, these people like China, the Philippines, Taiwan, what they're using these people to do, or Thailand, sorry, they're fighting too. They're forcing these people to fight or they're going to kill them. They're having these people basically lay down their life for the Emperor of Japan or they die anyway. It was completely ruthless.
Reinforced the Japanese idea that this was a divine war which they were destined to win, but their victories had been based on speed, not power, and power would eventually catch up with them.
Wow, I really liked how that was said. That was really cool how it was said with the atom bomb coming in.
As staggering as the Germans, and it reinforced the Japanese idea really that this was a divine war.
And yeah, that's the thing. Like I said, Germany believed that way too. Hitler believed he was the divine ruler to help Germany become the superpower. A lot of these people believe that. Mussolini wasn't really like that, but these two specifically were like that.
War which they were destined to win, but their victories had been based on speed, not power, and power would eventually catch up with them.
That was very well said.
For now, though, in all occupied nations, the people suffered. Persecution, forced labor, harsh punishments for any who spoke out against their occupiers. In Europe, the Nazis were rounding up ethnic minorities and other unwanted groups and individuals. In particular, millions of Jewish people would suffer through the terrible events of the Holocaust. Brave resistance movements rose up in defiance of their invaders, while the people held out for hope. And hope was coming. Winter was over, and Hitler...
And something I really liked, I thought was really cool, was my history teacher in high school brought a World War II vet in, and him explaining, he was there in one of the internment camps when he got there, and he just saw, it's crazy to think, dead bodies, piles of dead bodies just on top of each other. And if there weren't piles of dead body, there was piles of ashes to burn the bodies, and just shoes, piles of shoes. Like it's crazy. I couldn't fathom seeing something like that. And when he was telling us this story, it was crazy. And he was like, there were some points where he could even really talk. He was tearing up and things like that. That's how, this World War II vet tearing up just of the sight that he saw. It is a real atrocity.
Could continue his push eastward, but this time he switched up his strategy. He wanted to focus on the south. His plan was to cut off the Russian armies in the Caucasus,
Stalingrad, here we come,
invade the Caucasus and take all the oil. His forces moved across the north with ease, and
it was a very smart plan.
He rerouted the 4th Panzer Army south early, leaving the 6th Army to complete the encircling movement alone. To do so, the 6th Army had to reach and take the key Soviet city of Stalingrad. The Russians defended it fiercely, and Stalingrad...
And, the funniest thing about why the city was defended so fiercely is Stalin didn't want to lose it. His name's in it. He got it changed to his name. So he was making sure, losing Moscow, the capital, they didn't lose it, but, losing that would have sucked. But he damn near was going to be dead if they took Stalingrad. So he took everything he had left practically just to defend that city, which, in war, taking a lot of time off gives a lot, is a very good stress relief. That gives time for everything else to go on, for your allies to help build more shit. And it really made a huge difference that Germany really, really wanted this city. And, Hitler wanted to take it. He is prideful. Imagine Hitler at the victory he would have had if he would have been able to take Stalingrad, a city named over Stalin himself.
Saw some of the harshest fighting of the entire war. The Soviets held up the German advance for 5 months as they battled in the war-torn city, which bought them valuable time. When the Germans had first launched their invasion a year earlier, the Soviets had moved their factories to the east. Those factories had been building a butt-ton of tanks and aircraft and getting the Soviet army up to scratch. Now, it was ready. Stalin gathered his new and improved forces around the city, and in an attack that resembled Hitler's own encirclement tactics, they began surrounding the 6th Army. Hitler's commanders came to him and said, "Hey, maybe we should retreat." But Hitler said, no, you stay.
He was too persistent.
The entire 6th Army was trapped
I really like that.
With complete air superiority, the Soviets started pushing westward. For Stalin, it was a resounding victory. For Hitler, an absolute catastrophe. Things also weren't looking too good for Hitler elsewhere. With American...
With that happening, that's a turning point right there. When Russia started pushing back, because when Russia starts putting back, that starts the two-front war. And that's exactly how Germany lost the first time, was getting pushed back this way. And, Japan was starting to... although the tripartite pact existed, Japan wasn't really helping out too much over here. And Italy wasn't as competent as Germany. So really, it was Germany on its own, and Germany was spread hella thin.
Now in the war, Allied bombing over German cities reached devastating levels. In Africa, the British had pushed Rommel back again. Then they were pushed back again, and finally, after a decisive battle at El Alamein, and with American and British troops arriving in the west, the Germans and Italians were squeezed out of Africa. Japan was also already seeing its rapid success being turned around. They attempted to take the island of Midway. The US Navy was ready for the attack, and they sank Japan's carrier. Actually, they sank a lot of them. It was a battle from which...
Midway was the turning point in the Japan war, for sure. Japan's navy wasn't anywhere near the United States, and sinking all of these carriers and the damage they did, that was completely a turning point. It gave the United States all the naval superiority they needed, because Japan was already not capable of fighting, one-on-one, let alone losing as many carriers as they did, because the carriers and battleships weren't as just really got popular in World War I, and they weren't as common still. So there wasn't a whole lot to lose. There was a whole lot of risk. There was a whole lot to lose. It was more risk than reward.
The Japanese Navy would never recover. British, Indian, and Chinese troops held the line in the harsh jungle terrain of Burma, and the Japanese suffered losses in the Solomon Islands and New Guinea. They began to realize they were not invincible. With the Axis out of Africa, the Allies had to decide their next move. Churchill still wanted to attack from the south,
Italy,
while the Americans preferred a full sea invasion in northern France. All right, said the Americans, we'll do it your way. Allied forces successfully landed in Sicily and began moving north. They also carried out bombing raids over Rome. The thing was, many of the people in Sicily had relatives living in America, and they greeted the American troops.
Cousin Antonio, is that you? It is I, Luigi. Come and get a hug.
With the war reaching home territory,
and yeah,
most Italians just weren't that into it. And
exactly. That's a lot of times with these big
Mussolini.
Okay, I just didn't want it to be blurry. When it came to Mussolini and Germany and things like that, and a lot of these wars, you know, they were attacking everyone else. They never really saw the war. The people never saw the bad parts of the war. They only saw the victories. So it's cool believing in the war when you're winning, but when the war's on your territory and you're losing and your city's being torn up, the people's mind flips entirely. With Britain, that was the exact opposite. They were definitely an odd factor, because when Britain was being bombed, they got more pride, while these other people not at all. You know, when shit is really hitting the fan, that's when these dictators, these kings, you know, these leaders really take the hits.
Was suddenly very unpopular. He was voted out by his own fascist Grand Council and was toppled from power.
Even when Britain was being attacked, Churchill was taking a hit
and had already sent reinforcements southward. In an operation he ironically called Operation Axis, German troops quickly disarmed Italian troops in the north. The Allies continued fighting the Germans up through Italy, but then winter set in, meaning mud, and everything slowed to a halt. All right, said the Americans, let's do it our way as well. Germany had made itself a lot of enemies, and millions of Allied troops had been gathering in England as factories worked around the clock producing the war material needed for a super crazy massive, the likes of which the world has never seen before, invasion of Europe. The Germans knew an Allied invasion would come, but they didn't know where it would land. Thanks to Allied deception tactics, they thought there was a pretty good chance it would come at Calais, but the Allies were really going to land in Normandy.
Deception tactics, what they would do, it's very interesting. You guys all know about Army Man paratroopers, where they would, you know, when you have you throw an Army Man that has a parachute and it just flies down and things like that. What they would do, literally, is do that in a grand scale. They would send cargo ships over these cities and drop off parachuters, fake parachuters, and they look like the real deal, and they'd constantly do that multiple times a week to get the Germans thinking like, oh shit, attack could be coming, or to be like, you know, the boy that cried wolf scenario, that, you know, they see it so many times that when it really happens, they're not aware. And what actually happened is Germany thought they were going to land here. There was a fake, they got a fake message which helped them believe that.
Because it was less fortified and the beaches were nicer. Under the careful planning of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the invasion that had been long in the making was just about ready to go. Just one thing was preventing the launch: the British weather. For a short while, everyone sat around waiting for a decent day, and then it came. On the night of June 5th, over 1,000 bombers took off and raided coastline defenses, while paratroopers were dropped inland in a bit of a chaotic operation, tasked with sabotaging defenses and capturing key bridges to stop any German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. Early the next morning, the barrage came, as Allied ships fired a huge number of shells at the German fortifications, and then the landings. The Americans at Utah and Omaha, the British at Golden Sword, and the Canadians at Juneau. It was a tremendous struggle with a great loss of life, particularly at Omaha, but the Allied troops captured the beaches and the landings were a success. Then they began their movements inland. They took the port of Cherbourg and the city of Caen. The Americans moved south to...
Like, just to imagine, and this is going to be very prevalent in Japan, in the battle with Japan. Like, they were, you know, you'd think, oh, they just land and walk on the beach and, you know, fight war in the city. No, they landed on gunfire. There was turrets mounted, you know, people laying down. There was just fire upon these beaches, fire upon fire. It's actually pretty crazy how much damage, you know, how much life was lost just securing the beach.
Capture Brittany. Then, in a massive disaster for the Germans, British and Canadian troops from the north and Americans from the south trapped the German 7th Army in a near wipeout encircling movement. In August, Allied troops landed in the south of France to little resistance. On one beach, all they found was a Frenchman handing out champagne. Paris was liberated, and the Germans were pushed out of France as the Allies entered Belgium. In the Far East, the Allies started to push the Japanese out of Burma. as the Americans launched a two-pronged offensive in the Pacific. In the south, General MacArthur led the push to liberate the Philippines, while General Nimitz oversaw the brutal island-hopping campaign. American forces had to make hard-fought landing after hard-fought landing on fiercely defended small islands as they moved steadily towards the Japanese mainland. The Japanese believed that the greatest thing a person could do was to die in battle, and the most dishonorable act was to surrender. As a result, they fought ferociously to the very end, and the closer the Americans got to the mainland, the more ferocious the resistance became.
And like I said, you know, if they weren't, like, the worst part was the surrender. So you fought to your last life, or you committed suicide. Suicide was more honorable to them than being captured. And the thing is, as well, is that's why the atomic bomb was dropped. I mean, that's a very controversial topic and things like that. But you know, depending on your views and stuff like that, would you rather save, you know, your lives? Because we were losing a lot of troops. This is where most of our troop loss went to, is this island hopping. Because like I told you before, invading on French or Germany occupied French, you know, these turrets and everything set up. Imagine doing that, and setting up, and then doing it again, 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 because that's what they did. They had to constantly do it again. And like, imagine if you, for people that play games like Call of Duty or like CSGO, you know, when it comes to search and destroy or like taking a site, the defenders have the advantage, you know, a lot of the time. And imagine just doing that again and again and again, and the life lost and the trading that has to be done in order to achieve, you know, victory.
February 1945, the Americans captured the island of Iwo Jima, and an intense firebombing campaign of Japan's wooden cities began. The Allies suffered some setbacks trying to liberate the Netherlands, but they were making progress and were now threatening the industrial heartland of Germany. Hitler's health, both mentally and physically, was rapidly deteriorating.
It was an assassination attempt on him too.
He said, "We need to turn this thing around, and I'm just the trick." Remember a few years back when we blitzkrieged through the Ardennes and trapped the Allied forces in Belgium? Well, I'm going to do the exact same thing. Again. He gathered his forces and tried to pound them through the Ardennes. He used up the remainder of Germany's strength and resources, and he managed to create quite a nice bulge. He also trapped some American forces in the Belgian town of Bastogne. The Germans sent the trapped Americans a message saying, "Surrender or be annihilated." When it was read out to the commanding officer, he said, "They want to surrender? No, sir, they want us to surrender." Nuts.
Yeah,
and that's what they sent off as their
I remember in the documentary. So I'm a big World War buff, or world buff in general. And one of the coolest thing was watching World War II in color, the documentary, the response there, and everyone, the old people laughing about it and everything like that. But about the Battle of the Bulge, you know, that was Germany's real big last offensive. They really had no choice. They had to hope. Their goal was to go around and secure that port, because they secured that port, it would be able to last them long enough to build up more. But, you know, it was really at the very end. Like he said, Hitler's health was deteriorating. There was an assassination attempt on his life. He wasn't trusting his generals. Even his generals said, "Hey, we should not be doing the Battle of the Bulge. It's not going to work." And the reason why it worked so well at the beginning is because that was at the point where Germany lost most of its air force. Most of its air force was depleted, so it heavily relied on there being bad weather, because if there's bad weather, it's snowing and thundering and things like that, you know, no one can really go on the air. And Germany's, you know, panzer divisions were actually really solid, and troops were still there. They just had no air force, but the weather did clear up, which allowed air force to be securely in the Allies' hands. So, you know, that's just what happened. And then I really like the nuts part. That was such a cool story to learn.
Americans a message saying, "Surrender or be annihilated." When it was read out to the commanding officer, he said, "They want to surrender? No, sir, they want us to surrender." Nuts. And that's what they sent off as their official reply. General Patton's Third Army then managed to break the siege from the southwest, and the Germans were pushed back. Hitler's last-ditch attempt had failed, and what followed was a total collapse of the German forces. The Allies pushed into Germany from both sides. The Soviet Union took Warsaw and kept pushing to Berlin. In his bunker, Hitler realized all hope was lost. Berlin fell, and with it...
So he's been shooting himself in the foot the entire time.
The Soviet Union took Warsaw and kept pushing to Berlin. In his bunker, Hitler realized all hope was lost.
In this one, he shot himself in the head because the war is done. But in the bunker, Hitler committed suicide at the very end. So yeah.
Berlin fell, and with it, Hitler's dreams of a great German empire. 2 of the Axis nations had been knocked out, 1 to go. The Americans began their assault on Okinawa, the last island before they would reach the Japanese mainland. The desperate Japanese fought hard, launching kamikaze attacks on the US ships. The citizens of Okinawa suffered through the terrible fighting, but in 2 months, the island was captured. The Allies now had to make a choice. Either continue the devastating struggle up the Japanese mainland, or they could try to coerce the Japanese
I really wonder how many lives
would have been
lost if this happened.
Took place in New Mexico, and the destructive weapon was ready for use. America and the UK were also seeing the Soviet Union not so much liberating as occupying its captured territories, and so they wanted to put on a show of force. On August 6th, the A-bomb fell on Hiroshima. Then, on the 9th, Nagasaki.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, hundreds of thousands of lives were lost in just this bombing. Like, lives were already lost before because what they did is napalm raids on the wooden cities, and a lot of Japan's cities were made out of wood or buildings and things like that. So, you know, people were getting wiped out like crazy. But what they tried to do is they dropped letters saying to evacuate and things like that to try to avoid loss of life. But, you know, these radioactive wastes that would be contained within these bombs would taint the land for years and years. And imagine, like he said, they got bombed and still just continued on. They were still ready to fight. The generals were ready to fight. The more of the president's side of Japan didn't want to fight anymore. You know, they didn't really understand what even happened. Like, how did so much land be obliterated all at once? Because this bomb has never been even dreamed of. And like they said, it was more of a power play to show, you know, Russia, you know, who's the boss.
The cities were reduced to rubble, and for the people living there, it was a terrible fate. But for the Allies, it achieved their main aim. In September, the Emperor announced Japan's surrender, saying the war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. After 6 years, war was finally over. The Allies occupied Japan for 8 years. The Emperor was allowed to keep his position, but General MacArthur made sure this picture was printed in the Japanese press to display to the Japanese people that their Emperor was not the divine, powerful being they had believed.
Yeah, exactly. See, that message meant a lot. You know, him being a lot bigger and taller, and you know, these people, they saw this man as a god, and then this bigger person, General MacArthur, is just standing over him. You know, and that sent a big message.
The Second World War had been more powerful being they had believed. Germany was divided between America, the UK, France, and the Soviet Union. In 1949, the Allied sectors were united into West Germany. The Second World War had been more terrible and destructive than the first. In its aftermath, 2 major superpowers with 2 very different ideologies had come out victorious, and the tension between the 2 of them would create a new kind of war. A very, very cold one.
Very cold.
Wow, Churchill, that looks just like me. And your app is doing really well. Learn how to create being under 10.
Put Skillshare up there, his ad. I'll definitely have that ad in the description. But man, this is a long video, like 40 minutes. I just appreciate all the people who came by. Leave a like and let me know if you made it this far. Type World War II. But leave a comment section down, or leave a comment down below what you guys want to see next. Wow, this is a long video.